The long-term effects of zero population growth will greatly influence our population's sustainability, create major societal change, and ultimately endanger our economy in a long of live births to the number needed to replace the aging population. An extreme example of this attempt of population control can be seen in China, with their one-child policy beginning in the late 1970s. Consequences of this attempt of control of the population include forced abortion, infanticide, a severe difference in gender ratios, and the country has even seen cases in which female children were kidnapped because of their gender. This specific case could provide examples of what could happen if zero population growth were to occur. As of late, there's been a major increase in use of contraceptives on a global scale. In many developed countries, however, there's been a major shift in the focus of what is considered a family lifestyle. Many couples are becoming more focused on their careers as opposed to the classic family lifestyle of having several children. The trend that is now becoming more typical of modern families is having 2 children or less, as opposed to having a multi-child household. The cost of living has ultimately risen, and families are becoming unable to sustain a multi-child household as a consequence. In developing or underdeveloped countries, fertility rates have for the most part halved in recent years, though the population is still growing due to cultural, economic, and political influence. A quote from Nicholas Eberstad, PhD.
The reason the world has experienced a population explosion over the past century is not because human beings suddenly started breeding like rabbits, it's because they finally stopped dying like flies.
While our population is still growing from an aging population living longer, fertility rates worldwide are still on the decline. So why is it that zero population growth presents a problem in the projected future? Annette Dillon, manager of Rental Policy Canada Mortgage Operations, predicts that if true zero population growth were to occur in Canada, that within 50 years, quote, sustainability would become a major problem amongst a society, end quote. In a predictive future, the lower a country's fertility rates reach, the higher an aging population will grow. We've already begun to see these changes in developed countries. Due to a heavily aging population and only enough births and immigration rate to replace the workforce that is aging out, the average Canadian would need to pay higher taxes in order to support the changes in both society and in infrastructure. As a consequence to a heavily aging population, more money would have to be put into hospital care, as well as aging homes and geriatric care. She quotes, "Not only would the increase in taxes put a stress on the economy, but the applicability of retirement will decrease significantly due to the lack of replacement rates in the workforce." End quote. In the documentary Demographic Winter, Nicholas Eberstad, PhD of Harvard University, states that the working population between the ages of 15 and 64 will be slowing, and in a seemingly imminent future, declining as a result of low and decreased fertility rates. Not enough changes are being made by developed countries' governments to encourage reproduction rates, as many women are now invested into the workforce and often have their first child later in life, leaving little opportunity to have one or more children. This is where immigration comes into play. As an attempt to increase the population, Canada would be forced to open their borders even more and lax what immigration laws already exist in order to attract a larger population from other countries. It is predicted that if this situation were to arise, that the majority of immigrants would be young males from less wealthy countries, consequently leaving a smaller workforce in those developing countries. These changes in our population sustainability will ultimately cause a major societal reflex. With the zero population growth rate comes drastic changes within a society, not only in sustainability, but in how a society may conduct itself. We can compare a possible outcome in Canada by turning to what is currently happening today in Germany. For both countries, nationwide baby booms took place after World War II. The difference between the two, however, lies in total fertility rates and migration and immigration. Germany since the 1970s has actually faced a population decline due to their aging population beginning to die, yet having a total fertility rate of only 1.3 live births per woman. To quote Fanny Kluge, since the 1970s, the number of deaths has been greater than the number of births, and since 2004, these losses have not been compensated for by immigration, end quote. Combined with a high migration rate, Germany's population growth has taken a turn for the worst. Kathleen Cullen, a registered nurse specialized in emergency and trauma care, had some pressing points to make on zero population growth affecting the medical field. She says, "As healthcare providers age and retire, there are less people available to take their places, and that will result in a decrease in healthcare services. Geriatric care has become a healthcare specialty in its own right." Within the last 10 years, the geriatric emergency nurse has become a full-time position. This registered nurse assesses every patient over the age of 70 who enters the emergency department for any type of care. The patient's health and cognitive status, medications, and their ability to perform the activities of daily living are assessed to ensure that the patient is safe and competent to provide for their own care in their own home. If the patient fails this assessment, the nurse will consult with specialists within both the hospital and community settings to provide additional services. As the government has decreased the funding to hospitals, there has not been a reciprocal increase in community services. Therefore, community services may not be available. This results in daily havoc. The government relies on the population for taxes to fund the country. With retirement comes a decrease in taxes each person provides to the government. On reaching age 65, the population also begins to access the Canadian Pension Plan. Recently, the government has been reassessing how pensions will be provided because they are concerned with decreasing availability of funds." End quote. As aforementioned by Annette, taxes for further generations would skyrocket to ensure that proper care followed the aging population, which could potentially cause a social outcry from the young. This change and the consequences of it would affect our generation. Economies require a basic growth in population in order to truly thrive. Leanne Nielsen, PhD, had several important points to make relating schooling and marketing to zero population growth. So as a professor, how would zero population growth influence the general education of the population, in your opinion?
Well, I think if you look at it, our birth rate needs to be at about 2.1 to replace ourselves. And according to the last census that we can actually trust in 2006, Canada's birth rate was only 1.6. So that means for every couple, we're not producing enough babies here in Canada to actually replace ourselves. So in the education system, that causes a bit of a problem because, like many other systems in our country, it's all based on an economic model that says we're going to continue to grow, that the population will continue to expand. So every university is under pressure to accept more students, but we're not making more students.
Okay. What limitations would zero population growth impose on your particular field, so marketing?
Well, if you look at marketing and you think about, trying to sell to the consumer, it means we're not making enough consumers, right? Because businesses are also based on those sort of faulty economic models that our society and our economy will continue to grow. Now, there are ways that we can offset that. So for instance, if there aren't enough Canadians to sell to, then Canadian companies can look at exporting to other countries, right? And trying to get our goods accepted into those other countries as a way of just keeping sales level the same or perhaps even increasing them.
Okay. Would your field of study be able to adapt, or would it be destroyed by this zero population growth? What would the changes be?
Oh, I think we're already seeing those changes, and I think part of that is trying to adapt. It's not just zero population growth, though. I mentioned, take for instance the school I teach in, the Sprott School of Business. If we were to accept 500 students a year, that would be sort of steady state. But we're being asked to accept more. Well, if there aren't more, right, then we have to advertise, we have to recruit heavily. So probably you'll find, and other people in your class will find, that all of the universities are busy trying to attract you to come, because as the birth rate goes down and as the number of students of a university age declines, it doesn't cost any less, right? We still have to heat the buildings, we still have to pay the professors, we still have to buy the books for the library, whether 30 or 50 or 100 students use them. So what's happening now is we're starting to recruit more broadly. So we're recruiting overseas and we're bringing in students from other cultures because in many ways the Canadian education system is recognized internationally as being a good quality system and we cost less than some other countries. So that gives us a bit of a competitive advantage, but it means differences in the classroom. So, as a student, you're going to face a much more multicultural classroom. And for the professor, it means people with different cultural backgrounds. So for instance, if I was to ask a question on a multiple choice exam that assumed knowledge of a certain event in Canadian history, or having watched a certain commercial on TV, people coming in from another country wouldn't know that. Doesn't mean they don't know the concept. It just means they don't understand the context in which the question's asked.
What opportunities, if any, would arise from zero population growth? Would you believe that there are any advantages?
Oh, I think there could be some advantages, but I think it would take a radical shift in mindset.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the things that could happen is you could look at the benefits of having fewer students in the classroom as being a bonus, right?
Yeah, because the student-to-teacher ratio is like 30-1 in most high schools, which is unfair to most students and to the teachers for marking and learning opportunities.
Right, so we've just moved from a ratio of 50-1 to 90-1 in the introductory course I teach. And that's still pretty reasonable because in intro psych, it's not unusual to have a class of 1,000 people.
Wow.
So when you look at that pressure that's on the system to use resources wisely, right?
Yeah.
And then you also look at different things like for us at Carleton, we recruit traditionally from the Ottawa area, from the Valley, but we used to also recruit from the Toronto area. Well, now the Toronto schools are under pressure, so they're trying to keep their students. Plus, if you look at migration inside of Canada, right, so you look at what's happening to the schools in Atlantic Canada, with population moving from the Maritimes to other areas, their traditional student has disappeared. So now they're recruiting more heavily in Ontario.
Yeah.
So, you know, the whole system, if you work it through at a system level, has multiple impacts. But, you know, it would take a lot of wisdom to be able to say, well, this school is really good at teaching this topic, and we're going to try and keep our classes to 30, which is what you're used to in high school, or even 50, which is what we've become used to as professors, because there's a nice sense of community then, and there's an ability. I mean, I won't say I would remember all 50 names, but I would probably remember 40 to 45 names.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're finished second year, you might be thinking of going on an exchange, or you might be looking for a summer job. Well, in a class of 100 students, I'm not going to be able to give those reference letters anymore because I don't know who those people were.
Yeah,
and in fact, I can't see them at the back of the classroom. So it makes a huge difference.
Of course. Is there any present research in your field on how zero population growth will or might affect Canada in a projected future?
I think there's a lot of work now looking at sustainable consumption. And that word gets used a lot of different ways. One way is in terms of saying sustaining our current level of consumption, whether we can actually afford to. But another way is to look at what's good for the earth. So, you know, if you're looking at consumption in terms of what is environmentally friendly, then zero population might actually be a positive thing. But if it means that we're producing less waste, right? The flip side of that, of course, is we lose the manufacturing jobs that made the product in the first place if people aren't buying as much.
So we'd have to change more into a sort of what China's doing, a recycling sort of community, really focusing on that, really trying to adapt to help sustain a constant population.
And we also have to look at what it costs us to recycle.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm sure you've read the stories that say that it costs more to recycle than it would if we just threw the stuff into a landfill. So, you know, now we have to look at other things like repurposing old things. So then you start looking at things like the Habitat for Humanity Restore, where maybe the kitchen cupboards don't suit your taste anymore, but they might be perfectly fine if somebody painted them up and put them in their garage or even in their cottage or maybe even in their kitchen, right? So we can start to look at how can we reuse those things, but always keeping in mind that the person who made them is not going to be making them new anymore.
How do you personally believe that a stagnant population would affect Canada's youth?
Well, I think it's already affecting it. I mean, if you look beyond the education system and look at some of the other models. I mean, we have a model in Canada right now that says our current tax dollars are paying for our current education and our current health care. Well, as the population ages, it's normal that they would need more health care. So you're following the baby boom generation, right? Your taxes are going to have to cover health care for a lot larger group. And even if you look at other systems that aren't based that way, say something like your pension, right? It's really hard to predict when you're 25 what the world is going to be like when you're 65.
Exactly.
So we do have models, right? We are able to estimate your longevity, how long you'll probably stay alive. And we try and estimate what money the fund might make by investing it. But right now, I'm currently having to pay extra money into my pension plan, not to prepare for my own future, but to pay for the people who are currently drawing a pension, right? Because there's not enough money in there to meet the promises that we made to people. So, if you think of you coming along in the next generation with even fewer people, how do you support those people? And, they were made promises, they planned their retirement around a certain standard of living, but we now have companies like Nortel going bankrupt, and the pension's not there, and the disability support isn't there. But those people are still going to the hospital, still going to the doctor, they still need care. So, all of those costs have to somehow be borne by a smaller population unless we keep our population at the same level by immigration.
Not only would the younger generations be affected during their schooling, but after as well. Once an aging population begins to retire with little workforce coming in to replace them, many jobs could potentially become obsolete, leaving some degrees unusable. In short, if zero population growth were to occur within the lifetime of us, the grade 12 students of this class, we would suffer the consequences. Not only would our already high taxes skyrocket, but the shift in healthcare and economics would not be in our favor. With a large part of Canada's population belonging to the baby boomers, the focus would in fact shift away from the youth, and funding towards healthcare and geriatric care would skyrocket, leaving even less money to go towards schools and programs for the dwindling youth population. Jobs would be eliminated or become redundant as consequence of zero population growth, and when the time came that the baby boomers began to die, Canada's population would actually begin to decline due to the low fertility rates. Currently, Canada's increase, or stabilization rather, in population is for the most part thanks due to Canada's appeal for refugees and immigrants. There would be serious consequence if immigration rates lessened on top of our already low fertility rates. Zero population growth has the potential to devastate Canada and its upcoming generations.